Hello, I'm Jonathan Paramore, and today we're going to be talking about the economic equality in sports. When people hear about women's sports salaries, their first reaction is usually they get paid way less than men. And while that's true in some cases, the story isn't nearly that simple. In fact, in certain sports, women athletes actually make a larger percentage of the revenue their sports generates compared to men. Today, I want to challenge the pay gap narrative. We'll look at some numbers, talk about where the misconceptions come from, and ultimately think about what these comparisons really tell us about equity in sports. The common narrative. The popular narrative everywhere, you see headlines about the U.S. women's national soccer team fighting for equal pay. You hear comparisons of WNBA salaries to NBA salaries. You'll hear people say things like, it's outrageous that women make pennies compared to the men, and that perception exists for a reason. Men's sports leagues like the NBA and NFL bring in billions of dollars. Women's leagues like the WNBA bring in millions. So when you compare the paychecks side by side, it looks wildly unfair. But those comparisons often leave out one important factor: revenue share. Reality check. Let's look at some examples. Take the NBA versus the WNBA. The NBA players receive about 50% of the league's revenue. WNBA players until recent years were closer to 25 or 20%. As of 2024, according to their contracts with CBA, that number has dropped to 9.3% of the total revenue. That gap is real, and it's a fair criticism. The men are getting a much larger share of their league's money. Now let's flip to soccer. Before the Equal Pay Agreement in 2022, the U.S. women's national team was actually earning a larger percentage of their team's revenue compared to the men. Why? Because the women were winning championships, selling jerseys, and generating excitement, especially during World Cup years. In some years, their total payouts were even higher than the men's team. Let's look at tennis. In tennis, since 2007, all four Grand Slam tournaments, Wimbledon, the US Open, the French Open, and the Australian Open, have paid equal prize money to men and women. In fact, women's matches often draw just as many viewers, sometimes even more than the men's. That's a sport where equal pay has already been achieved and the market supports it. Now let's talk about the misconceptions and the overall context. Here's where the misconceptions come in. People often say women are always paid less than men, but when you look at the revenue share, that's not universally true. Sometimes women are earning a higher percentage of the pie. The real issue is that the pie itself, the total revenue, is much smaller. For example, the NBA the NBA's annual revenue is close to $10 billion. The WNBA's is about 200 million, and that 200 million is given to the WNBA or subsidized to the WNBA by the NBA. And in fact, the WNBA loses 40 to 60 million dollars a year. Even if WNBA players got the same percentage as NBA players, the actual dollar amounts would still look dramatically smaller. That's not necessarily unfairness, it's economics. So the conversation shouldn't just be men versus women. It should be, how do we grow the women's game so that their pie gets bigger? So let's look at growing the pie. The good news: women's sports are growing fast. NCAA women's basketball set viewership records in 2023 and 2024, with Caitlin Clark becoming a household name. The WNBA is signing bigger broadcast deals. Women's soccer continues to draw global attention as revenue grows. Salaries will naturally follow the growth of the revenue. That's already starting to happen. The real solution isn't to cut men's paychecks or force artificial equality. The solution is investment, better marketing, better sponsors, and better visibility for women's sports. When the money coming in rises, the pay disparity will shrink on its own. In conclusion, so when we talk about pay disparities in sports, we have to look beyond the surface level comparisons. It's not always as simple as saying women are underpaid and men are overpaid. In reality, women sometimes get a bigger slice of their pie and sometimes smaller. The real challenge and the real opportunity is growing the women's pie. Because once the revenue grows, the salary grows too, and that's the path forward toward true equity in sports. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Again, I'm Jonathan Paramore. I hope you have a great day.